I love the Appalachian mountains and foothills, especially in the South. I grew up in the Piedmont of Northern Virginia, and that type of land resonates in me. I love the oldness, the undulation, the softness, the lushness. My husband and I decided to take a vacation that involved driving the entirety of the Skyline Drive and then the Blue Ridge Mountain Parkway, stopping to camp and hike and explore along the way. One or both of us had been on this route piecemeal, but not together, and we'd never traveled the whole thing. We brought adult perspectives that eluded us as children. Skyline Drive is 105 miles long and starts in Front Royal, Virginia. The Blue Ridge Mountain Parkway is 469 miles long and ends in the Smoky Mountains near Cherokee, North Carolina. We also went into the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. What we saw while driving was so beautiful. The speed limit was so low, and it took so long to get where we were going that sometimes we actually got tired of the beauty. The reason the Appalachian Mountains look so old and soft is because they are. They've had a long time to erode. They formed during a collision of the African and North American plates 500 to 300 million years ago. At one time, they were probably as high as the Himalayas or the Alps. After the collision that lifted up the Appalachians, the plates drifted apart, creating the Atlantic Ocean. The Scottish Highlands and the Appalachians are actually the same mountain range, and the Scots definitely felt at home in the Appalachian Mountains. More about that later. In all of our travels through and near Appalachia, we were aware of the people there, past and present, who were not of European origin. We drove straight from New York City to Winchester, Virginia, in the fertile Shenandoah Valley. The Shenandoah Valley is the wealthiest part of Appalachia. Old Winchester is lovely. At the north end of the valley, it was the base of operations for Confederate invasions into the United States. Winchester changed hands 72 times during the Civil War. We visited Luray Caverns, which we'd each been to many times. Water mixes with carbon dioxide from the air, forming what is essentially seltzer, which hollows out the weaker minerals in limestone. As the water drips, the carbon dioxide is released as the water droplets crystallize. The crystallized stalactites from the ceiling and the crystallized stalagmites from the floor eventually meet. They grow 1 cubic inch every 120 years. The Luray Caverns are 450 million years old. They are the largest caverns in the eastern United States. Already known to Native Americans, they were discovered by European Americans in 1878 when a sinkhole emitting cool air was noticed near a limestone outcrop. The caverns are dramatically lit and a huge tourist attraction. Luray Caverns has an organ that uses the stalactites to produce different pitches. Luray Caverns would be the safest place to be during an earthquake. On the site of Luray Caverns is also the Shenandoah Heritage Village, which reconstructs a made-up village using real structures. There is an adjacent museum that gives one pause for thought. Many indigenous artifacts were on display, but why did European settlers here encounter so few Native Americans when the Shenandoah Valley was so fertile and hospitable? You realize the indigenous people must have died from European diseases before the wave of settlers arrived. Why was the population here never more than 12% African in origin, which is so low compared to other nearby parts of Virginia and especially parts of North Carolina, which were half black? You reflect that the early settlers here were largely German and Swiss Mennonites with small land holdings. Mennonites and Quakers have some things in common. Quakers once exploited enslaved people, but stopped after the influence of fellow Quaker John Woolman. The Heritage Museum displayed many household items. Based on the clothing, you realize the people who lived around here were very short. The next day, we visited the Shenandoah Museum, which included art, history, and gardens. There was a special exhibit of John Chumley, who was a painter that worked mainly in watercolors, more saturated in color than I usually see in watercolor painting. He had an austerity and loneliness reminiscent of Andrew Wyeth, but could also be lush in his landscapes. His character studies reached into the soul of a working person. I liked a non-mythic portrait of George Washington painted by Rembrandt Peale. The museum showed biographical films of Black people from this region and the lives they built in the interlude after slavery and before Jim Crow. The historical section of the museum showed unwilling African immigrants along with European immigrants in the joint building of wealth. I appreciated the space given to recreating house interiors from different levels of prosperity. We were in Frederick County, which was named after the German-born father of England's King George III. George III ruled the colonies prior to the Revolution. The gardens were the estate of Glen Burnie. Glen means valley, and Burnie means waters in Scottish Gaelic. There are Glen Burnies everywhere the Scottish people settled. The last owner of the estate was gay and lived there openly with his partner beginning in the 1960s. He deeded the estate to the public. There were typical Federalist rooms in the house, whimsical modern art exhibits, and a delightful, very proper woman answering questions. The landscaping, in addition to active vegetable and herb gardens and decorative gardens, included a large bamboo garden and a few Chinese gates. The grounds were peppered with animals made of Legos. After all this introductory exploration, we finally set off for the Skyline Drive. As so many ethnicities were present in Luray Caverns, more than I remember from my childhood, so too on the Skyline Drive. Anglos abounded, but it was fortifying to enter the drive along with people originally from the Indian subcontinent or the Middle East, and to hear the sounds of their music and languages from the cars they drove. A father and son in a family of 4 wore yarmulkes and sidelocks. Asian people were everywhere. It was fortifying to experience the presence of as many interracial couples as I do in Brooklyn. All of us were getting out of our cars at overlooks and taking pictures, our mouths hanging open. It was fortifying to set up camp in Appalachian national parks alongside families who spoke Spanish. The U.S. government created the Skyline Drive through the Civilian Conservation Corps as part of the New Deal. And now all of us could look together across the blue beauty of several mountain ranges. Racism is definitely with us, but this was the best 4th of July I could have imagined. Once we entered the federally run Shenandoah National Park campsite, the presence of deer was startling. We saw over 100 deer up close on this trip. The birdsong was intense. The types and configurations of people's tents were intriguing. Fellow campers were respectful of the 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. quiet time. Our first hike was to Rose Falls. It was 4.5 miles long and supposedly only moderately difficult, but we completed it with quite a sense of accomplishment. We crossed paths with many fellow hikers, some of them happy, handsome dogs. We passed one small group of Mennonites, women in long dresses in a sort of contemporary style and little white cap buns in back. We got friendly with a mother from Pennsylvania traveling with her 14-year-old daughter. We bumped into them many times, and the short conversations seemed full and potent, as they often do in these circumstances. They alerted us to the remains of an old mill and a graveyard in the woods. When we got back to the campsite, we took mood-altering hot showers for $5 apiece, after which I noticed a well-traveled French-speaking couple with a small daughter, La Petite, splitting the 1 10-minute shower between the three of them. The next day, we took a shorter, easier hike on the Loft Mountain Loop Trail. Again, it was beautiful. But after a while, what can you say to describe beauty? At the trail's parking lot, a woman capping off a motorcycle with a male partner warned us of the thunderstorm rolling in. Most people who seek this kind of experience are nice to one another through a common bond. On the way back to camp, we stopped at the Elkton Tea Room and Creamery after much searching and bad GPS directions. The people working there were so nice. The place was lovely to look at, and the artisanal ice cream was amazing. I started with a scoop each of strawberry cheesecake and blueberry cheesecake, then went back for a third scoop of raspberry, which was the best of the three. There was a great 60s playlist going. The creamery was our first reminder that we were in an area of the country where religious belief is expressed more casually than what we've grown accustomed to. We broke camp the next morning, finished traveling the Skyline Drive, and entered the Blue Ridge Mountain Parkway.